My secret luxury condo hidden from my parents. At lunch, Mom declared, "We know about your place and your sister is moving in." I held my breath, but 2 weeks later when they arrived. Crash. A shocking climax. Ignored calls. Full story. I still remember signing those closing documents on a Tuesday afternoon back in March. My hands were steady, but inside my heart was thrumming. This wasn't just any purchase. It was a penthouse condominium on the 42nd floor, a breathtaking sanctuary overlooking the Chicago skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows, gleaming Brazilian walnut floors, Italian marble countertops in the kitchen. It was everything I'd worked a decade for. Every single dollar earned by me and paid in full. The wild part. I told no one. Not my parents, not my younger sister, absolutely nobody. Keeping it a secret felt less like a choice and more like an instinct, a necessity born from years of dealing with my family. I was 33, a regional director in pharmaceutical sales. I'd clawed my way up from an entry-level rep through countless 14-hour days, endless weekend conferences and late-night strategy sessions. While others relied on charm or pure luck, I built my career on meticulous research, genuine relationships with physicians, and an almost encyclopedic knowledge of every single product. And my family, my success, my achievements, they were always met with casual acknowledgement. I graduated college with honors, and my mom spent dinner talking about how Bethany finally passed her driving test on her 4th try. I got my first promotion, and my dad immediately suggested I get Bethany an interview because she was struggling. Bethany, who was 29, still living in my parents' basement, still waiting for opportunities to just materialize without any real effort. She drifted through 3 different colleges without a degree, cycled through a string of retail jobs, and spent most of her time cultivating a social media presence that generated more envy than income. My parents funded her entire lifestyle: car insurance, credit cards, gym memberships, with a generosity they had never once extended to me. I moved into the condo that Saturday. Professional movers, minimal but expensive furniture. A charcoal gray leather sofa, a glass dining table, a custom mattress that cost more than my first car. I hung abstract art, installed smart home tech, programmed the security system with codes only I knew. This building was a dream, a fitness center with personal trainers, a rooftop terrace with outdoor fireplaces, a business center, 24-hour concierge. The monthly HOA fees were more than my old rent, but I could afford them. My neighbors were surgeons, corporate attorneys, business owners. We exchanged polite nods in the elevator, no probing questions, no judgment. The anonymity was incredibly liberating. After years of family gatherings where every aspect of my life was up for discussion and dissection, this felt like true freedom. I even set up the second bedroom as a home office, with built-in shelves for my professional library, my desk facing the lake. Evenings, I'd review sales reports, prepare presentations, the city lights twinkling below me. It was my sanctuary. Then 3 weeks after I moved in, a text from my mom: "Join us for lunch on Sunday?" Casual, but I sensed the calculation. I'd been avoiding family dinners, citing work obligations. My absence had clearly been noted. I arrived at the restaurant at 1 p.m. My parents and Bethany were already there. Mom in her special occasion navy blouse, Dad with a trimmed beard. Bethany, as usual, absorbed in her phone, her manicured nails tapping away. "Christina, darling. So glad you could make it," Mom gushed, embracing me in a cloud of overwhelming floral perfume. "We hardly see you anymore." "Work has been demanding," I said, settling into my chair, unfolding my napkin deliberately. "Just launched a new product line, managing the regional rollout." "Always so dedicated," Dad said, a familiar edge in his voice that made it sound less like a compliment and more like a gentle jab. "Your mother and I were just telling Bethany how proud we are of both our daughters." Bethany glanced up, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore a designer sweater I recognized, likely 4 figures. Their generosity towards her, it seemed, continued unabated. We made small talk, rehearsed and bland, about the weather, golf, neighborhood gossip. I knew they were building to something. I just sipped my water and waited. Patience, I'd learned, was the key to revealing their true agenda. Dessert arrived before Mom finally laid it out. She put down her fork and fixed me with the look, the one from my childhood, signifying news I was expected to accept without argument. "Christina, we need to discuss something important," she began. We know about your apartment. The restaurant noise faded. I carefully placed my coffee cup on its saucer, meeting her gaze. Pie condominium, I corrected, my voice quiet, steady. Yes, your fancy new place downtown, Dad interjected, his tone laced with accusation. Quite an upgrade from that little apartment. You didn't mention you were moving. I didn't realize I needed permission, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I'm 33 years old. That's not the point. Mom leaned forward. The point is your family, and family shares important news. We had to hear about it from Barbara Hendress at the grocery store. Apparently, her son works in real estate and handled a transaction in your building. Can you imagine how embarrassing that was? Finding out my own daughter bought a luxury condominium from a stranger. I felt that familiar heavy weight of guilt try to settle on my shoulders, that old programming demanding explanations and apologies. But I resisted. I straightened my spine, maintaining eye contact. I wanted privacy regarding my personal decisions. Privacy, Bethany muttered, still glued to her phone. That's rich coming from Miss Perfect, who used to lecture me about responsibility. Bethany. Mom snapped, though the reprimand was hollow. She turned back to me, her expression softening into what she probably thought was maternal concern. Darling, we're not upset you bought a place. We're thrilled you're doing so well, but we think it's time you gave back to the family. Helped out your sister who hasn't had the same advantages you have. The absurdity of that statement hung in the air like a noxious gas. We grew up in the same house, attended the same schools, received the same opportunities. The difference? I worked multiple jobs through college while she partied away freshman year before dropping out. I started at the bottom, while she waited for a high-paying position to magically appear. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked, already knowing the answer. The pattern was too familiar. Dad cleared his throat, adopting his retired middle management boardroom voice. Your mother and I have been discussing Bethy's living situation. She's ready to be independent, to move out on her own. But rent in the city is astronomical, and she's still building her career as an influencer. Influencer. I repeated, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Bethany's social media following was mostly other aspiring influencers and bots. Her engagement was dismal, despite the hours she poured into curating her image. Yes. Mom said firmly. She has nearly 10,000 followers now. And brands are starting to notice her. She just needs the right environment to grow her platform. And you have that beautiful second bedroom that's just sitting empty. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They wanted Bethany to move into my condominium. Not visit. Not stay temporarily. To live there rent-free, while I supported her continued avoidance of actual employment. The second bedroom is my office, I stated. You can work from the dining table, Mom waved her hand dismissively. Or from your bedroom. You always were adaptable. And this would just be until Bethany gets on her feet, Dad added. 6 months, maybe a year. Just until her influencer income becomes more substantial. I looked at Bethany. She had finally put down her phone, watching me with an expression of entitled expectation. She hadn't asked me herself, hadn't even pretended to be grateful. She simply assumed I would comply because I always had before. Always accommodated. Always made room for her needs at the expense of my own. No, I said simply. My mother blinked. I'm sorry. No, I repeated, enunciating each syllable clearly. Bethany is not moving into my condominium. Now or ever. Christina, don't be selfish. Dad began, his face reddening. Family helps family. You have more than enough space and money. Your sister needs support. Bethany needs to support herself, I said, standing and reaching for my purse. She is 29 years old. She has had more than enough time to figure out her life. How dare you? My mother hissed, her composure finally cracking. After everything we've done for you, after we raised you and loved you, this is how you repay us? By abandoning your sister when she needs you. Other diners were starting to stare. I didn't care. Years of swallowed frustration rose in my throat, demanding to be voiced. You raised us both. You loved us both. The difference is, you expected me to earn everything while handing Bethany whatever she wanted. I put myself through college. I built my career. I saved and invested and worked weekends and holidays. And now that I've finally achieved something for myself, you want me to share it with someone who has never worked for anything in her life. You always thought you were better than me, Bethany cut in, her voice sharp with resentment. Miss Career Woman. Too good for family. I thought I was entitled to the results of my own labor, I corrected. There's a difference. I placed 2 20s on the table, more than enough to cover my portion of the meal, and turned toward the exit. My mother called after me, her voice shrill with indignation, but I kept walking. The spring air felt crisp and clean after the stifling atmosphere of that restaurant. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel as adrenaline coursed through me. The confrontation had been inevitable. They viewed my success as a family resource, something to be distributed according to their priorities, not mine. The parking garage beneath my building felt like a sanctuary. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor, appreciating the smooth ascent, the quiet elegance. This was mine. I had earned it, and I would not apologize for refusing to subsidize my sister's perpetual adolescence. Inside, I made tea and stood at the windows watching the city below. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the buildings, and somewhere down there my family was probably still at the restaurant, dissecting my refusal and planning their next move. I knew my parents well enough to understand that one rejection wouldn't end this. My phone buzzed with incoming messages. My mother. My father. Even Bethany. All expressing varying degrees of disappointment, anger, and wounded feelings. I read them once, then muted the conversation thread. Their words followed a predictable pattern. I was selfish, ungrateful, cruel to deny my sister this opportunity. No one acknowledged that they were asking me to sacrifice my privacy and independence so Bethany could avoid the struggles I had endured. Over the next few days, the messages continued. Voicemails from Mom, dramatic proclamations about family loyalty. Emails from Dad, citing examples of successful people who helped their siblings. Bethany posted vague social media messages about betrayal and the loneliness of having no one to count on, carefully curated to generate sympathy from her followers. I ignored it all. I focused on work. We were launching a new cardiovascular medication. I spent long hours with physicians, presenting clinical trial data, training my sales reps. This job demanded precision, expertise, qualities I'd cultivated. Unlike my family, my professional colleagues respected competence and rewarded results. 2 weeks after that disastrous lunch, I returned home from a business dinner to find 3 missed calls from my mother and a text message that made my blood run cold. We are coming over tomorrow to discuss this properly. We will be there at 10 o'clock in the morning. No request for permission. No acknowledgement that this was my home. Just an announcement of their intended invasion. I sat on my sofa, options swirling in my head. I could confront them, turn them away at the door, but that would mean taking time off work for a conversation that would inevitably devolve into accusations. Or I could simply not be home, let them knock on a door that wouldn't open. Neither option addressed the larger issue. My family had demonstrated a fundamental disrespect for my boundaries. They believed they had a right to my home, my resources, my life. This wouldn't end with one refused visit. They would keep pushing, keep demanding, keep expecting me to bend. I needed to make my position absolutely clear, in a way they could not ignore or rationalize away. I pulled out my laptop and began researching security options. My building had standard systems, but I wanted something robust for my individual unit. Something that would not just alert me to unauthorized entry, but would have real, undeniable consequences. By midnight, I had designed a comprehensive plan. First thing the next morning, I called the building's security director. I explained my need for enhanced protection due to family members attempting to enter without authorization. He was sympathetic, professional. He offered solutions that integrated with the building's existing systems. I installed additional smart locks requiring both a code and biometric verification. I upgraded my security cameras to include facial recognition technology. Most importantly, I contracted with a private security firm that monitored high-value properties across the city. Their response time was under 5 minutes, and they had direct lines to local law enforcement. The final component was the most crucial. I filed a formal trespassing notice with the Chicago Police Department, specifying that my parents and sister were not authorized to enter my property under any circumstances. The officer who took my statement asked if I was certain, warning it could have serious legal consequences for my family. I assured him I was very certain. The paperwork established a clear legal boundary. If my parents or Bethany entered my condominium without permission, they wouldn't just be breaking a family trust or violating my privacy. They would be committing a crime. I spent the afternoon making final preparations. I tested every component of the security system, verified camera sightlines, confirmed the private security firm had my updated contact. I set my phone to forward all alerts to my smartwatch. That evening, I packed a bag and checked into a downtown hotel. I had an early meeting the next morning in the western suburbs, so staying closer to the highway made logistical sense. But the real reason was simpler. I wanted to be elsewhere when my family arrived. I wanted the systems I had put in place to handle their intrusion without my emotional involvement. I slept poorly, checking my phone every hour, even though I knew the system would alert me immediately if triggered. At 7 a.m. I showered and dressed in my best suit, a charcoal gray ensemble that projected authority and competence. My makeup carefully applied, my hair styled. My meeting was at 9 a.m., which meant I would be in a conference room, presenting clinical data, when my family arrived at my building. The timing felt appropriate, a physical manifestation of my priorities. While they focused on entitlement and taking shortcuts, I would be doing what I had always done. Working. The presentation went well. I stood before 12 physicians and hospital administrators, discussing efficacy rates and safety profiles with the confidence that came from thorough preparation. My slides were crisp, my delivery polished. I fielded questions with ease. This was the world I had built for myself, one where merit mattered and results spoke louder than family connections. At 10:15 my smartwatch vibrated. I glanced down discreetly, my heart rate accelerating as I read the notification. Motion detected at front door. Multiple individuals attempting entry. I continued my presentation without missing a beat, years of professional discipline overriding my personal anxiety. I showed the next slide, explained the medication's mechanism of action, discussed potential applications. All while my watch continued to pulse with updates. Unsuccessful entry attempt. Alarm triggered. Security notified. The meeting concluded at 11 a.m. I excused myself to the restroom before checking my phone properly. The security system had captured everything. Multiple cameras recorded my family's arrival, their attempts to enter using the doorbell, then their escalating frustration when I didn't answer. The footage showed my mother pressing the doorbell repeatedly, her face tight with irritation. My father stood beside her, arms crossed, checking his watch. Bethany leaned against the wall, scrolling through her phone, obviously bored. After 5 minutes of unanswered rings, my mother retrieved something from her purse. The camera angle captured it clearly. A key. Not just any key, but one that looked professionally cut, probably copied from a master key they imagined I'd left at their house during a previous visit. I watched in fascinated horror as my mother inserted the key into the lock. The smart system rejected it immediately, flashing red. She tried again, jiggling the key, pushing against the door. Nothing. This is ridiculous. My father's voice came through clearly on the audio. She gave us a fake key or changed the locks, my mother replied, her voice sharp. Which is exactly the kind of secretive behavior we should have expected. I had never given them a key. Never. The realization settled over me like ice water. They had obtained one somehow, probably through deception or by copying a key they thought belonged to my previous apartment. The violation felt profound. The footage continued. My father tried the key himself, then pulled out his wallet and attempted to slide a credit card between the door and frame, a technique that might work on a standard lock, but had no effect on my upgraded security system. Throughout this, Bethany remained engrossed in her phone, occasionally sighing with impatience. Just call her, Bethany said finally. This is stupid. We are not calling, my mother snapped. She knows we're coming. She's probably hiding inside being petty. Or she's at work like a normal person, Bethany muttered, but my mother ignored her. The next part of the footage showed my father examining the door frame, running his fingers along the edges, clearly looking for weaknesses. He tried forcing the door, putting his shoulder against it and pushing. The reinforced frame didn't budge. This is absurd, my mother cried, her voice rising. We are her parents. We have a right to be here. I don't think that's how property ownership works, Bethany observed, finally looking up from her phone. You be quiet, my mother said. This is for your benefit. What happened next unfolded with a surreal quality. My father pulled out his phone and made a call. Within minutes, a man in work clothes appeared carrying a toolkit. The camera captured him clearly. I recognized him. Dennis, my father's friend, a locksmith. They were attempting to have my locks changed in broad daylight at a door that wasn't theirs. Dennis examined the lock, shaking his head. This is a high-security system integrated with the building. I can't just override it, and legally I shouldn't be here without the owner's authorization. She's our daughter, my mother insisted. We have authorization. Do you have it in writing? Dennis asked, clearly uncomfortable. We don't need it in writing, my father blustered. This is a family matter. Dennis backed away, shaking his head. I can't help you. This could get me in serious trouble. He left. My parents stood in the hallway, looking increasingly frustrated. Then Howard, the building security guard, appeared. He was a professional, courteous man whom I'd always found efficient. Excuse me, Howard said politely. Is there a problem here? We're trying to access our daughter's apartment, my mother explained, adopting her most charming tone. She's expecting us but seems to be having issues with her locks. Miss Christina did not mention any scheduled visitors, Howard said, his voice even. And she has explicitly instructed us not to allow anyone into her unit without her direct authorization. That is preposterous. My father flared. We are her family. I understand, sir, Howard replied, remaining calm but firm. But I have my instructions. I will need to ask you to leave the floor. We will do no such thing. My mother said, planting her feet. We have every right to be here. No, ma'am, you do not, Howard replied, his voice still calm but now with a steel edge. This is private property and you are not authorized guests. If you do not leave voluntarily, I will need to call the police. I watched my mother's face transform. Shock gave way to indignation, then to something uglier. You would have your own mother arrested? What kind of person have you become? She wasn't speaking to Howard but to the camera, as if she knew I was watching. Perhaps she did. Perhaps she understood on some subconscious level that I had prepared for exactly this scenario. I am giving you one final warning, Howard said. Please, leave now or I will be forced to take further action. My father grabbed my mother's arm, trying to pull her towards the elevator. But my mother wrenched free and did something I hadn't anticipated. She began pounding on my door with both fists, shouting my name, demanding that I let them in. Christina, open this door right now. This is your mother. You cannot treat us this way. Bethany stepped back, embarrassment finally overtaking her usual indifference. Mom, stop. This is crazy. But my mother was beyond reason, pounding and shouting, her voice echoing through the hallway. Other residents began opening their doors, drawn by the commotion. People I'd nodded to in the elevator were now witnessing my family's complete loss of control. Howard pulled out his radio and spoke into it quietly. Within 2 minutes, 2 more security guards appeared, followed shortly by 2 Chicago police officers. The police officers were professional and calm, their presence immediately changing the energy in the hallway. What seems to be the problem here? The first officer asked, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of patient authority. Howard explained the situation concisely. These individuals have been attempting to gain unauthorized entry to one of our units. The owner has explicit instructions that they are not to be admitted. When asked to leave, they refused and became disruptive. We are her parents, my mother said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and something that might have been fear. She is being unreasonable. We just want to talk to her. Is the owner present? The officer asked Howard. No, ma'am. She is at work. The officer turned to my parents. Do you have written permission to be here? We don't need permission, my father said, but his bluster had diminished. She's our daughter. That is not how property law works, sir, the officer replied. Do you live at this address? No, but then you are trespassing, she said simply. The property owner has the right to determine who enters her home. If she has denied you access, you need to respect that. This is insane, my mother said, looking at the gathered neighbors as if seeking allies. Can you believe this? A daughter locking out her own family. No one spoke. The other residents watched with expressions ranging from discomfort to disapproval, but that disapproval seemed directed at my family rather than at me. The second officer, younger and built like someone who spent significant time in the gym, checked something on his phone. "Ma'am, sir, I am showing that a formal trespassing notice was filed for this address 3 days ago, naming you specifically. That means you are legally notified that you are not welcome here. Your presence constitutes criminal trespass." The color drained from my mother's face. "Criminal trespass? That's absurd. She's our daughter." "That does not grant you access to her property," the officer said. "You need to leave now. If you refuse, we will place you under arrest." I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, watching this unfold on my phone. Part of me felt sick seeing my parents humiliated in front of strangers. But a larger part felt vindicated. They had pushed and pushed, assuming I would eventually bend. Now they were facing actual consequences for their refusal to respect my boundaries. My father took my mother's arm again. "Let's go. This isn't worth it." "Not worth it," my mother repeated, her voice rising again. "She's family. She shouldn't be allowed to just cut us out." "Ma'am," the female officer said, her tone hardening. "You need to leave immediately." "I will not," my mother said, and I watched in disbelief as she crossed her arms and planted her feet. "Not until my daughter agrees to see us. We have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," the officer said, and I realized with a shock that she was actually going to arrest my mother. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "You can't be serious," my father said, stepping between the officer and my mother. "This is a family dispute, not a police matter." "Sir, step back," the younger officer said, moving forward. "Do not interfere with an arrest." What happened next unfolded with the jerky unreality of a nightmare. My father refused to step back. The officers gave him multiple warnings, their voices firm but not yet aggressive. My mother continued to shout about her rights, about ungrateful children, about the deterioration of family values. Bethany stood frozen against the wall, her phone clutched in her hand, her face pale with shock. For once in her life, she seemed to understand that the situation had spiraled beyond her control. The officers moved simultaneously. The female officer guided my mother's arms behind her back, producing handcuffs with practiced efficiency. My mother screamed, an incoherent sound of rage and disbelief. My father lunged forward, trying to pull the officer away from my mother, and the younger officer intercepted him, taking him to the ground in a controlled maneuver that looked painful but professional. Within 30 seconds, both my parents were in handcuffs. My mother was sobbing now, her earlier defiance collapsing into hiccuping cries about how this was all wrong, how I had done this to them, how I was destroying our family. My father said nothing, his face red and his eyes fixed on the floor. "Bethany Louise, don't just stand there," my mother wailed. "Call our lawyer. Call someone." Bethany fumbled with her phone, her hands shaking. "I don't know who to call, Mom. We don't have a lawyer." "Then call your sister. Make her stop this." The irony would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. Even now, handcuffed and being arrested for trespassing, my mother expected me to solve the problem, to make everything go away, to sacrifice myself for the family's comfort. The officers led my parents toward the elevator. Howard held the door open, his face carefully neutral. I could see several of my neighbors watching from their doorways, witnesses to the complete implosion of my family's attempt to invade my home. Before the elevator doors closed, my mother looked directly at the camera, as though she could see through it to wherever I was watching. "I hope you're happy, Christina," she said, her voice raw. "I hope this is what you wanted, because you have just destroyed your family." The doors closed on her words and the hallway fell silent. Bethany remained standing against the wall, her face streaked with tears. Howard approached her gently. "Miss, you need to leave as well." "I know," Bethany said quietly. "I just need a minute." She wiped her face with her sleeve, a gesture so uncharacteristically childlike that I felt an unwelcome pang of sympathy. Then she looked up at the camera, and when she spoke, her voice was clearer than I had ever heard it. "I didn't want this," she said. "Any of it. I just wanted to live my life, but they kept pushing you and you kept giving in. And I guess they thought that would never stop. I guess we all thought that." She pushed away from the wall and walked to the elevator without looking back. I sat in my car for a long time after the feed went dark, my hands trembling despite the warmth of the afternoon sun through the windshield. I had won. I had established my boundaries in the most definitive way possible. My parents would face charges. Probably a fine at minimum, possibly probation. They would have criminal records for trespassing, a permanent consequence for their refusal to respect my autonomy. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow, as though I had just watched a bridge burn with everyone I had ever known standing on the other side. I drove back to my condominium in the late afternoon, the spring sunshine casting long shadows across the city streets. The drive gave me time to process what had happened, to move beyond the initial shock and adrenaline into something more complicated. The security system had worked exactly as designed. My boundaries had held. The consequences I had warned about had materialized precisely as I had intended. The parking garage felt different now, knowing what had occurred upstairs just hours earlier. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor, half expecting to find some remnant of the confrontation. But the hallway was pristine. The building staff had cleaned away any evidence of the morning's chaos. Inside my condominium, everything was exactly as I had left it. The windows framed the city skyline in golden afternoon light. My furniture stood undisturbed. The sanctuary I had worked so hard to create remained inviolate. I sat down my briefcase and pulled up the full security footage on my television, watching the entire sequence from beginning to end. The camera angles captured every moment. My parents' arrival, their progressively more aggressive attempts to enter, the appearance of the locksmith, Howard's professional intervention, and finally the police. What struck me most was not my mother's breakdown or my father's physical intervention or even the arrests themselves. It was Bethy's face in those final moments before she left. She had looked tired, I realized. Not just physically tired, but existentially weary, as though she had been playing a role for so long that she had forgotten how to stop. My phone had been buzzing throughout the afternoon. Messages and calls from extended family members who had heard about the arrests. Apparently, my parents had immediately begun calling relatives from the police station, spinning a narrative in which they were the victims of my cruelty and unreasonableness. Aunt Patricia, I can't believe you had your own parents arrested. What has gotten into you? Uncle James, your mother is devastated. She raised you better than this. Cousin Melissa, family is everything. How could you? I read through them all, recognizing the pattern. My parents had always been skilled at controlling the narrative, presenting themselves as loving and generous while portraying me as difficult and ungrateful. The difference now was that there was video evidence of what had actually occurred, documentation that could not be explained away or reinterpreted through convenient lies. I drafted a single message and sent it to every family member who had contacted me. I purchased a condominium with money I earned. I did not invite anyone to move in with me. When my family attempted to enter my home without permission after being explicitly told they were not welcome, I enforced standard trespassing laws that apply to everyone. If you would like to see the security footage of them attempting to break in and then refusing to leave when asked by both building security and police, I am happy to share it. Otherwise, please respect my privacy. I attached a 20-second clip from the footage, showing my mother pounding on the door while shouting and my father attempting to force entry. Then I muted the group conversation and set my phone aside. The evening stretched before me, empty and quiet. I made dinner, a simple pasta dish with fresh vegetables, and ate standing at the counter while the city lights began twinkling on below. This was supposed to be my victory. The moment when I finally established my independence and freedom from family dysfunction. So why did it feel so much like loss? The answer came to me as I was rinsing my plate. It felt like loss because it was loss. I had lost the fantasy that my family might someday see me as I actually was, might recognize my worth without trying to extract value from it. I had lost the hope that my parents might eventually treat me and Bethany with equal respect, might stop enabling her while demanding more from me. Those losses hurt, but they were losses of illusions, not of anything real. The relationships I had mourned had never actually existed, except in my imagination and desperate hope. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Bethany. I hesitated, then answered. Christina. Her voice was small, uncertain in a way I had rarely heard. I'm here. They're being charged with criminal trespass. Dad too, because he tried to stop the cops from arresting Mom. Their court date is in 3 weeks. I know. Silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her sitting somewhere in my parents' house, surrounded by the remnants of a childhood neither of us could return to. Why did you do it? She asked finally. Why not just talk to them? tell them no again. I did tell them no, I said quietly. At lunch. Clearly and definitively. They chose not to accept that answer. They chose to show up at my home uninvited. They chose to attempt to break in when I wasn't there. They chose to refuse to leave when asked by building security and police. Every step of this was their choice. They thought you were bluffing, Bethany said. They thought you would never actually let them get arrested. I know. More silence then. I didn't want to move in with you. So you know. I have my own life, weird as it is. They decided that for me like they always decide things for me. Like I'm still 12 and can't make my own choices. This surprised me. Then why did you go along with it? Because fighting them is exhausting, she said simply. You know that. You fought them your whole life. I just gave up and let them run things. It was easier. How did that work out for you? She laughed, a sound without humor. I'm 29 years old, living in my parents' basement with no degree and no real job prospects. So not great. I guess. You could change that. Maybe, she said. Maybe not. But at least now I know where you stand. No more wondering if you might cave if they push hard enough. No, I agreed. No more wondering. For what it's worth, Bethany said, her voice going even quieter, I don't think you did the wrong thing. I think you did what you needed to do. I just wish it didn't come to this. Me too. I should go. Mom is calling me from the other room. She wants me to convince you to drop the charges. That's not how criminal charges work. The state is prosecuting. I can't drop anything. I'll tell her that. She probably won't listen. Bethany paused. Take care of yourself, Christina. You too, Bethany. The line went dead. And I was alone again in my beautiful condominium, surrounded by everything I had worked for and sacrificed to achieve. The city sprawled below me. Millions of people living their lives, navigating their own complicated relationships with family and autonomy, and the impossible balance between loyalty and self-preservation. The next 3 weeks passed with surreal normalcy. I went to work, attended meetings, met with clients, and managed my sales team as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The absence of my family's constant demands created space I had forgotten could exist. Room to breathe and think without the perpetual weight of their expectations. The extended family's response evolved from initial outrage to grudging silence as more people watched the security footage I had shared. Seeing my parents attempt to break into my home, watching my mother's theatrical breakdown, observing my father's physical aggression toward police officers, these things were difficult to rationalize away. The narrative my parents had constructed of a cruel daughter punishing her loving family crumbled under the weight of visual evidence. My Aunt Patricia called to apologize. I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions, she said. Your mother made it sound like you had them arrested for just showing up. She didn't mention the breaking and entering attempt or refusing to leave. Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, I think you've been remarkably patient with them over the years. More patient than I would have been. Other relatives followed suit, some apologizing, others simply stopping their messages of condemnation. A few sided firmly with my parents, accepting their version of events despite the contradicting video. I blocked those numbers and moved on. At work, I threw myself into the new product launch with renewed focus. Without the constant drain of family drama, I found I had energy for strategic thinking, for mentoring younger sales representatives, for building partnerships with medical practices across my region. My supervisor noticed the increased productivity and mentioned that I was being considered for a promotion to senior director, a position that would include a substantial salary increase and equity in the company. I met with my financial advisor to discuss investment strategies. The condominium had been an excellent purchase, already appreciating beyond my projections. We talked about diversifying my portfolio, about long-term wealth building, about the power of compound growth over decades. For the first time in my adult life, I was planning my financial future without factoring in potential demands from family members. 3 days before the court date, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Christina. Her voice was subdued, lacking its usual commanding tone. We need to talk. I'm listening. The lawyer says we are going to be convicted. Criminal trespass is apparently very straightforward, especially with video evidence and the police reports. He says the best we can hope for is a fine and probation, but it will be on our permanent record. That sounds accurate. This will ruin us, she said, and for the first time, I heard genuine fear in her voice. Your father volunteers at the community center. They do background checks. He'll lose that. And I'll lose my position on the library board. We'll be criminals. You committed a crime, I said simply. This is the consequence. But it was just about family, she protested. We weren't trying to rob you or hurt anyone. We just wanted to talk to you. By breaking into my home? By refusing to leave when asked by security and police? By attacking an officer who was trying to arrest you? Your father did not attack anyone. He was trying to protect me. He physically grabbed a police officer who was performing a lawful arrest. That is assault on an officer. He's lucky they're not charging him with that as well. Silence. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, what do you want from us? The question hung between us, heavy with implications. What did I want? An apology would be meaningless, just words designed to manipulate me into making this problem disappear. A promise to respect my boundaries would be equally hollow, forgotten as soon as they faced another inconvenience. I want you to accept responsibility for your choices, I said. I want you to stop expecting me to sacrifice myself for Bethy's comfort. I want you to understand that I am not a family resource to be allocated according to your priorities. We are your parents, she said. We gave you everything. You gave me the same things you gave Bethany. The difference is that you expected me to be grateful and compliant while allowing her to be entitled and dependent. You created this dynamic, not me. So you'll just let us be convicted? Let us have criminal records, destroy our reputations in the community? I filed a police report because you committed a crime. What happens next is between you and the legal system. She made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. You have become so cold, so hard. This is not the daughter I raised. You're right, I agreed. The daughter you raised would have given in. Let Bethany move in. Sacrificed her own peace and privacy to avoid conflict. That daughter died somewhere around the 43rd time she accommodated your demands at her own expense. What you have now is a woman who knows her worth and defends her boundaries. If you find that cold, perhaps you should examine why you preferred the alternative. I ended the call before she could respond. The court hearing took place on a Thursday morning. I did not attend, having no legal obligation or personal desire to watch the proceedings. Instead, I learned about it secondhand through a text from Bethany, guilty on all counts. Mom and Dad got 6 months probation, $500 fine each, and mandatory community service. They're devastated. I read the message in my office, sitting at my desk with spreadsheets open on my monitor, and a cup of coffee growing cold beside my keyboard. I felt no satisfaction in their conviction but no guilt either. The legal system had functioned exactly as designed, applying standard consequences to standard crimes. Bethany sent a follow-up message. They want to know if you'll talk to them now. I considered this. Part of me wanted to maintain complete separation, to build my life without any connection to people who had demonstrated such fundamental disrespect for my autonomy. But another part recognized that complete estrangement would be its own kind of prison, requiring constant vigilance to maintain. I called Bethany instead of texting back. Hey, she answered. What do they want to talk about? I think they want to apologize. Really apologize, not just say words to manipulate you. The lawyer was pretty brutal in explaining how badly they messed up, and I think it actually got through. Or they want me to help them avoid the consequences somehow. Maybe, Bethany admitted, but I don't think so. They looked really shaken at the courthouse, like they finally understood this is real. I thought about it, weighing my options. Tell them I'll meet them in a public place with you present. 1 hour, 1 conversation. If they try to guilt-trip me or make demands, I will leave immediately. Fair enough. I'll tell them. We met 4 days later at a coffee shop near the Botanical Gardens. Neutral territory where none of us had personal history. I arrived early and chose a table near the back, positioning myself where I could see the entrance. Old habits from years of managing difficult family interactions. My parents arrived together and I was struck by how diminished they looked. My father had aged noticeably, new lines around his eyes, a stoop to his shoulders. My mother wore minimal makeup and her hair was pulled back simply, without her usual careful styling. They looked like what they were, people who had faced consequences they had never imagined possible. Bethany arrived last, sliding into the seat beside me in a gesture that surprised me. A subtle alignment, a quiet statement about where she stood. "Thank you for meeting us," my father said, his voice formal. "We know you didn't have to." "You have an hour," I said. "I suggest you use it well." My mother twisted her napkin between her hands. "We've been talking to a therapist. The court required it as part of our probation, but we've been going to extra sessions trying to understand how things got so bad." "And what has the therapist told you?" "That we have been using you as a surrogate parent for your sister," my father said bluntly. "That we failed to give Bethany the skills she needed to be independent because it was easier to rely on you to pick up the slack. That we treated your success as a family resource instead of recognizing it as your personal achievement." The words sounded rehearsed, probably repeated from therapy sessions until they could recite them without stumbling. But beneath the rehearsal, I heard something resembling genuine understanding. "We were wrong," my mother said, finally looking directly at me. "Wrong to expect you to let Bethany move in. Wrong to try to break into your home. Wrong to refuse to leave when asked. Wrong to prioritize her comfort over your boundaries. Wrong about all of it." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do it?" She looked at my father, then back at me. "Because it was easier. Because Bethany struggles with things that came easily to you. And it seemed cruel to let her fail when you were right there, capable of helping. Because we told ourselves we were keeping the family together. But what we were really doing was avoiding the hard work of teaching her to stand on her own. And it wasn't fair to you," my father added. "We can see that now. We made you responsible for problems that were not yours to solve." Bethany spoke for the first time. "They've been in therapy sessions with me too, talking about my patterns, my avoidance, my dependence. It's been pretty brutal, honestly, but necessary." "What happens now?" I asked. "We fulfill our probation requirements," my mother said. "We continue therapy. We learn to be better parents even though our children are already grown. And we hope that someday you might be willing to have a relationship with us again. Not the old relationship where we made demands and you accommodated, something new, something healthier, where we respect your boundaries and appreciate you for who you are." I sat back in my chair processing this. They looked sincere. They sounded sincere. But words were easy. Change was hard. "I need time," I said finally. "Time to see if this is real or just a performance to get back into my good graces." "That's fair," my father said. "We understand." 6 months passed before I agreed to another meeting. During that time, I watched from a distance as my parents followed through on their commitments. My father completed his community service at a food bank, logging twice the required hours. My mother attended therapy every week and began volunteering at a women's shelter, working with residents on job skills and financial literacy. Bethany moved out of my parents' basement and into a modest apartment with a roommate. She got a job as an administrative assistant at a marketing firm, entry-level work that paid little, but provided structure and experience. Her social media presence became less curated, more authentic, showing her actual life instead of an aspirational fantasy. She was building something real finally, even if it was small and imperfect. When I finally agreed to dinner with my parents, it was at a restaurant of my choosing at a time convenient for my schedule. These details mattered. They demonstrated that the power dynamic had shifted, that my needs would be centered in our interactions going forward. The evening was awkward but genuine. My parents asked about my work, my life, my interests, and actually listened to the answers. They shared updates about their own lives without making demands or dropping hints about how I could help. When my father mentioned that Bethany was struggling with her car payment, my mother immediately changed the subject, a conscious course correction that I recognized and appreciated. "We are proud of you," my mother said as dessert arrived. "We should have been saying that all along. Without qualifications or comparisons. Just proud of who you are and what you have built." "Thank you," I said simply. We didn't become a close family overnight. Healing from years of dysfunction required more than a few dinners and therapy sessions. But we established something workable. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. I saw my parents every few months, met them for lunch or dinner, maintained cordial contact. Bethany and I developed our own relationship separate from our parents. Occasional coffee dates where we talked about our lives without the weight of old resentments. I never invited any of them to my condominium. That space remained mine alone. A sanctuary I had fought to protect. They never asked to visit, understanding that some boundaries were permanent. My career continued to flourish. I received the promotion to senior director, then advanced again to vice president of the Midwest region. I bought a small vacation property in Wisconsin, a lake house where I spent summer weekends reading and kayaking. I dated occasionally but never seriously, content with the life I had built. The story of my family's arrests spread through our extended family and social circle. A cautionary tale about boundaries and consequences. Some people saw me as cold and unforgiving. Others recognized me as someone who had finally valued herself enough to demand respect. I stopped worrying about which narrative people believed. 5 years after the incident, I ran into my old building security guard, Howard, at a restaurant downtown. He recognized me immediately and came over to say hello. "You probably don't remember me," he began. "Of course I do," I said. "You helped me establish very important boundaries." He smiled, looking relieved. "I've thought about that day many times. Wondered if I did the right thing, if I could have handled it differently." "You did exactly what I needed you to do," I assured him. "You enforced my rights when my own family wouldn't respect them. That mattered more than you know." "I'm glad," he said. "I have daughters of my own and I've tried to teach them what I learned from watching you. That they don't owe anyone access to their lives, not even family. That boundaries are healthy and necessary." After he left, I sat with my drink and thought about the woman I had been 5 years ago, standing in that restaurant with my family, demanding I sacrifice my home and privacy. That woman had been afraid, uncertain whether she had the right to protect what she had earned. The woman I was now had no such doubts. The arrests and convictions had consequences that extended far beyond the legal penalties. My parents lost several social connections. People who couldn't reconcile the image of respectable community members with individuals who had criminal records for breaking into their daughter's home. My father eventually resigned from his volunteer position, not because they asked him to, but because he felt the weight of judgment every time he showed up. My mother stepped down from the library board for similar reasons. They moved to a smaller house in a different neighborhood, a fresh start where fewer people knew their story. The shame followed them anyway, as it should. They had violated fundamental principles of respect and consent, and those violations came with social costs that no amount of therapy could completely erase. As for me, I stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows 5 years later, watching the Chicago skyline glitter in the evening light, and felt only peace. The price of protecting myself had been high, but the cost of continuing to sacrifice my own well-being would have been higher. Sometimes revenge isn't about elaborate schemes or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's simply about refusing to accept less than you deserved, about enforcing boundaries, even when everyone insisted you were wrong to have them. My family had learned that I meant what I said, that my no was final, and that lesson had been worth every uncomfortable moment.